Alright, I promised a lot of people a bit of post-election analysis from me. Some of you will have been following probably my Twitter feed where I was doing a bit of a commentary through the night. It did drop off a little towards the end, terribly sorry about that, but by that point I had been up for 20 odd hours and was pretty exhausted and just watching the results come in. I did stay up for the whole thing. I did see every result come in. I was up for pretty much 30 hours solid, which was loosely entertaining. Did enjoy. I enjoyed it. It was good fun. But I promised some people, as I said, some sort of post-election review. This is late, as you will as you will have noticed. There is a reason for that, and that reason is that I really had to think about this one because, wow, frankly, I mean, it was the most exciting election I've ever seen, certainly. And genuinely, I thought it was quite astonishing what came out of it, both in terms of the results and the inevitable bloodbath of resignations that followed. So, we'll start with we'll start at the beginning. That's what Lewis Carroll said, wasn't it? Begin at the beginning. So, the coverage on the night. I did go to vote myself. It was quite a nice day out here in Kensington. It was quite a nice day. A lot of people out to vote. There was an awful lot of people. I actually ended up going to 2 polling stations because I didn't get my polling card through. So I didn't actually know which of the local polling stations I was supposed to be at. So I went to the one on the Portobello Road, and then subsequently, when it wasn't that one, I went to the proper one. Having been directed by the lovely staff there who were incredibly helpful in this respect. So, lots of people out to vote. Not many people actually canvassing at the polling stations. I was expecting more. In the past, you always see people outside, but this time, the first one there was a Labour chappie out and about, and the second one there was also a different Labour team out and about. But no, they didn't seem to actually be doing much canvassing. The one of them sort of accosted me as I came out and asked me who I'd voted for and what my voting card number was. I didn't tell him because, whole point of elections is it's secret. So I didn't tell him, but so's that. But yes, so good day. I think most people who wanted to got to vote. I know a lot of people were very excited about it, and it was a very important election. And it really was a very important election, this one. I had it down as certainly the most interesting and probably the most important election we've had since the war, in sheer terms of the potential consequences and outcomes from it. And what an outcome we had, ultimately. I know I said I'd begin at the beginning, but I am going to keep referencing the outcome because I am still, even now on Sunday at 8:30 when I'm recording this, still genuinely astounded at what happened. So once I'd voted, the only other people I saw out canvassing, I actually had to go into uni early in the morning, so I did see a van, a UKIP, one of UKIP's vans with a picture of an escalator on the side that makes them look like some sort of shopping centre advert. But we shall talk more about UKIP later, I think. If the lighting conditions change in this video at any point, like between scenes, as it were, I'm terribly sorry. I'm recording in bits because my flatmate may come back at some point, and she'll come back, and it'll interrupt it. So I am going to record this in bits and then stitch them all together. I'll try and do some sort of flashy transition between the two to make it less noticeable. You may also be getting a really poor quality recording of this because I'm having to use my actual webcam inbuilt to my laptop. And I mean, I'm looking at the video now. This is what I'm looking at, and it's really slow and delayed. So there'll be little sync between what I'm actually saying and what my lips are doing. Sorry about that. At this stage, it can't be helped. So we're going to start with the coverage. I'm going to save this bit of the video. Yeah, see, I told you, do it in bits. And then I'm going to talk about the coverage and about what I did when I got home from voting and doing all that nonsense. So I went and voted, as you do. I walked home, as you also do, unless you happen to have a car or public transport. In either case, if you do, you probably live too far away from the election centre, or you live in the countryside, and you have a choice. So yes, I came home. I sat down. I sort of did a bit of a running commentary at the BBC because obviously the press outlets are forbidden from forbidden from broadcasting poll results and stuff. So we didn't have any exit polls or anything at that time until voting finishes. Voting finished this time, of course, at 2200 hours. So I did a bit of a commentary as they had sort of pictures of the leaders going in to vote, etc., etc. But it was strictly limited in its scope, purely on the fact that I didn't have really much information coming into Gentleman HQ here. So nothing really picked up until, of course, 10 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock, I sat myself down with. I got some food ready, so I was ready and raring to go. I had a pretty late lunch as well, so I sort of spread my eating out over the evening. I sat down here in this very seat, this very throne itself, in front of this very machine here, and began watching the results and the coverage. I ended up watching the BBC coverage. I did flick open. I had 4 screens open. One of them had the BBC filmed coverage, the Dimpleby and Andrew Neil stuff, and then the other 2 had the other 3. Sorry, one of them had the BBC text commentary because I was keeping an eye on that. One of them had the Guardian, I think it was. One of them had the ITV, I think, and the other had Sky. So I did have a broad scope of electoral different providers. So I wasn't just taking one and satirizing that badly. I was badly satirizing all of them. So yeah, I sat down and I started watching this, and then of course we had that massive upset of that exit poll that came out. That put the Conservatives rather higher than anyone was expecting. And all of a sudden, the inevitable question started to be asked, of course, why? Why on earth was this not picked up? Why was this such an upset? Why had the polling organisations not picked up on this? Why had they not identified that actually a lot more people were going to vote Tory than had said they would? Now, of course, in this post-election haze that we are in now, there is a lot of speculation about this. The most, I would say, probably the most accurate of it is the shy Tory theory, that there's a lot of people these days who are shy to declare themselves Conservatives, because there was actually a very good article on the Independent website, and I would look it up. I might try and send a link to it in the comments, the description of this video, talking about how the shy Tories have been repressed, and talking about what the author called the self-righteousness of the left. And I mean, obviously I do have political views. I vote, so obviously I vote for a party. I'm what the politicians hate, in that I'm pretty much a floating voter. I vote for whoever I think is best for the country at the time. And yeah, I'm not one of these people who has a particular, oh, I will always vote X or I'll always vote Y, or I don't do that. I think that's it's a pretty shabby way of running a democracy. If everyone's just saying, oh well, of course, Party X will never do anything for me, so I'm never going to vote for them. I think that's a pretty shabby way of running a democracy. The people who do that sort of thing are second only in my my distaste. That I distaste them only slightly less than I distaste those people who say, "Oh, I'm not going to vote at all." So that's me expressing my view that I don't think much of the system. Russell Brand, I'm looking at you, you floppy head dickwad. No, gentlemanly. Come on, let's be gentlemanly about this. So, those people, can't stand them. If you're gonna not vote, you go away and you spoil your ballot. Then you've registered an opinion. Then you have the right to complain. If you don't do that, you don't vote at all, no right to complain as far as I'm concerned, because you haven't taken part. I'm not one of these people who goes on about, people have been fighting for centuries to get you that right to vote. I'm not going to do all that, because it's sort of right, but in equal terms, a lot of people aren't going to care about that sort of thing. It's not my job to tell you whether you should or shouldn't care about that sort of thing. But so Where was I? I completely lost track. I don't have a script or anything for this. I've got a couple of notes, but I only actually got to write like one thing before I just thought, oh, sod it, let's just record. So if it gets a bit disjointed, that's the second reason why it might be. So yeah, but then we had that massive upset of that poll. Massive upset. Right, I'm back. Did you notice the snappy edit there? My editing might get better in time, but I doubt it. So yes, the exit poll. That it was. I mean, I think it was truly shocking. The other theory, other theories I've seen bandied around is that there was just some massive cock up on the behalf of the polling organisations. I'm not sure I buy that because it was a problem. If it was a cock up on all of their parts, and it seems a little unlikely to me they would all cock up in exactly the same way. So I'm sticking to this shy Tory theory that's bandied about. The coverage itself, I thought it was quite good actually. I mean, it's always a difficult one election night because they essentially have to fill 12 hours essentially with a lot of. In the early phase until 1 o'clock, you don't really have. You have one or two results, but then there's nothing. And you always have Sunderland, and it was it Newcastle, I think this time had a bit of a race going on so you could get the first result in. Congratulations, Sunderland, on that. I'm not sure it's a massive big deal, but so they had the race, and I was watching it quite directly actually. I didn't have anything else going on apart from reading the text feeds, reading the Twitter feeds. I had that up with the general election hashtag. I was keeping an eye on what people were saying on the Vine because these days it's that's the Twitter Vine, not the short videos made by bad comedians. So yeah, I was keeping an eye on that, and I mean Dimpleby. Dimpleby's just a national treasure, isn't he? You can fault him, but he's a wonderful chap. He knows what he's doing. So yeah, his coverage I thought was fantastic. Andrew Neil, I'm not such a fan of Andrew Neil as far as I can tell. His job is to crop up and annoy the heck out of everyone. So for the first couple of hours of that BBC coverage, obviously they were all obsessed with the exit poll, and they were all obsessed, of course, with Lord Ashdown's statement that if the exit poll was right, he would eat his hat. It was basically the Paddy Ashdown eats his hat show for the first 4 hours, which got a bit tiresome after a while. There's only so many jokes you can make about that, and so many types of hat you can speculate about him eating, which they did do for a bit. I'm a hat fan, but that makes it more abhorrent to me because I don't like the idea of people eating hats. They are for wearing, not for nourishment. If you want nourishment whilst you have a hat on, you get something that is not a hat. You don't just take your hat off and eat it. But anyway, I'm falling into the same trap they did and getting obsessed with the hat, which I shouldn't do. So, and then we started getting the results in. Of course, the first results, they always were because, they were Labour. The first, God knows how many seats, they were Labour seats, and it was looking rather rosy for Labour until you remembered that actually there were 600 odd left to come. And yeah, so I'm not going to take you through the whole coverage. If you watched it, if you were interested, you watched it. If you weren't interested, you weren't watching it. You probably won't be watching this, to be honest, because if you're not interested, excuse me, the witterings of some half-baked satirists like myself are not going to be of any interest at all. Satirist / commentator, I should say. There's not much satire in this, just the odd gag about people in general. So I'm going to move on now, I think, to reflections. Obviously, we know the result. I'm just going to get it up because I don't want to misquote it. So, obviously, by the end, by about midway through, it was clear that there was going to be a bit of an upset, particularly for Labour, basically. It wasn't surprising the SNP took so many seats. I'll come on to that later. But still, they were losing. It was places like Nuneaton. They were losing. Battersea was the first London seat because obviously they targeted London quite heavily, Labour, in this one. And they did do very well in London. They did considerably better than they did everywhere else. But it became clear the Labour election campaign hadn't quite been the success they might have hoped for. And we ended up by, well, it was about midday on Friday, I think we had the last result. I think it was the one from the Scilly Isles where they have to get the boat to take it home. We ended up with this result of 331 Conservative seats, 232 Labour seats, 56 SNP seats, 8 Lib Dem seats, 8 DUP seats, 4 Sinn Féin seats, 3 Plaid Cymru, 3 Social Democratic and Labour, 2 Ulster Unionist, 1 UKIP, and 1 Green Party. I'm going to talk about all those parties for a bit in short succession. I'm not going to talk massively about the Northern Irish ones because I don't know all that much about Northern Irish politics, and I don't really want to talk about something I don't know much about because it'll make me look like an idiot, and I may offend people. I'm not usually worried about offending people, but if I'm offending people because I don't know of something, I kind of don't want to do that because that's unfair to me. It's unfair to them. It's unfair to everyone who voted for them. So they'll be pretty much in a random order, these next little commentaries, because I don't know which one I'm starting with. So yeah. Okay, so we're going to start with the SNP. Scottish Nationalist Party, Scottish National Party, sorry, not the Scottish Nationalist Party, nationalist ideology. You know all this. If you've been paying attention to the election, the SNP were the absolute buzzword for this one because they were always going to have such an effect on it. I'm pointing this pen at the screen. I don't know, it's not going to jump out and hurt you or anything, but just keep an eye on it in case, because I am likely to sort of fling it backwards or something at some point. So yeah, the SNP. I mean, the SNP. I'm not personally a massive fan of the SNP. I know I said I don't adhere to party ideologies and stuff. I'm not a huge fan personally of the SNP. I'm a bit of an old-fashioned guy, and I happen to think that a unified Britain is a good Britain, is a safe Britain. I think the Scots feel very undervalued, which is why they have the SNP, and I think that's a tragedy in and of its own right. Whatever the truth or otherwise of their fit. But the SNP undeniably have grown to run a really good campaign. Now, I think the reason they've grown to run this so well is because they haven't had a choice, because we are fundamentally a 2 or 3 party democracy, depending on how you see it. Again, something we'll be talking about later when I talk about the Lib Dems. But the SNP they've had to be able to run good campaigns. And in the last few years, I mean, the rise of the SNP, as it's referred to always in those doom-laden tones they like in the popular media, has been nothing short of astonishing. Their sort of magnum opus, of course, being the Scottish independence referendum last year. It will not surprise you to learn I'm not a supporter of independence. But you have to give them credit. The campaign they ran, despite the fact that ultimately they lost, which I was quite happy about, although it was very sad but despite the fact that they lost, and they lost by a good 10%, they did run a fantastic campaign. The other thing they have to their credit, as well as their sort of grassroots approach to campaigning, I have a lot of friends who are members of the SNP who are out, pounding the pavements, is that they are very good at choosing leaders. They have very good leaders. Alex Salmond was bizarrely charismatic. He's not a man who looks like he should be full of charisma. He's a man who looks like he should be the foreman on some building site. But he demonstrated in the referendum campaign just what a good leader he is, and just how powerful his voice can be when he's speaking for a cause he really believes in, when he's speaking for the people he really believes in. And his resignation in any other circumstances would have been a bit of a blow, would have been a bit of a tragedy for the SNP. But of course, this time it wasn't, because they had someone waiting in the wings to take over, the marvellous Nicola Sturgeon. Now, Nicola Sturgeon, what can we say about Nicola Sturgeon? Nicola Sturgeon is a brilliant politician. An absolutely brilliant politician, and in a lot of ways, there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with me on this, I think she's sort of wasted where she is. If she was a Labour Party politician, she would be leader, she would be doing fantastically well, and Labour would be home and dry pretty much for a bit, I think, because she is persuasive, she's charismatic, she's got, the va-va-voom, as they used to say in that old Renault advert or something. I'm not sponsored by Renault, just to put that out there. I don't have sponsorship deals. Although from the surroundings of my desk, you'd think I'm sponsored by Post-it notes, but I'm not. But yes, no, Nicola Sturgeon. I'm always reminded, particularly having during this campaign, that she would absolutely hate the comparison, of course, of Thatcher. There is, to my mind, they have a heck of a lot in common. Nicola Sturgeon is the Iron Lady of Scotland. The Iron First Lady, I should say, of Scotland. But she ran a fantastic campaign. You saw her in the debates. She was reasonable. She was, thoughtful, thought-provoking. She did all the things that a good politician should do. And she interacted with the public well. I always think she looks a bit evil. She looks like she eats babies in her spare time. But I don't think, you shouldn't judge people on their appearance, I know. And I really wouldn't, because, she is a superlative politician. She really is. She's really in it for the passion. She's got the ideals. She's got the ideas to back them up, even if they're sometimes a bit ropey. And what's more, she really cares about the people she represents. Obviously, she wasn't standing for a seat in Westminster because she's First Minister of Scotland, so she's sort of got she's got a job already. Not that that stopped Boris Johnson, but again, come on to that later. Nicola Sturgeon can't fault the SNP campaign. No real surprise that they took most of Scotland. Was slightly surprised they didn't take all of Scotland. I have to admit, I thought they might. But the ones who clung on there, I think, I don't know what sort of campaign they were running, but they were clearly running good ones to beat the SNP. I know there's local differences in in support levels, but it was still, I think, a close run thing. So the SNP, you really can't fault them. They really put the cat amongst the pigeons, with regards to Labour, obviously, in this one, because Labour were just wiped out in Scotland, and that it was inevitable, but it was also very awkward for them because they really didn't need that in this election. It really split the sort of socialist vote, and that was for Labour a bit of a disaster, a bit of a crisis. Right, Green Party next. The Green Party. What can we say about the Green Party? Obviously, the Green Party went into this on a bit of a rot, as did most parties, rather, other than the two major ones. But didn't go as well as they'd hoped. Now, a lot of people, there's been a lot of talk about alternative voting, proportional representation. Again, I'll come on to talk to that. I'll talk about that a little separately later, because I think that warrants a little clip of its own. But yeah, the Green Party have a problem, a key problem, which is that they have a lot of appealing ideas. They have a lot of appealing ideals. They're a party based on principle. And in politics, that's always a dangerous thing. They have all these wonderful sounding policies. Don't get me wrong, their policies, they're beautiful, some of them. But they don't have concrete plans to put them into action. And if you're trying to convince people to run a country, they don't just want to know what your principles are, they want to know how you're going to affect those. And they've never quite got the hang of this, the Greens. They're a protest party. You know, if you look at, Carolyn Lucas, their MP, who obviously was re-elected, and I think that was a great thing. I really do. And Carolyn Lucas, another one like Nicola Sturgeon, who is a real grassroots politician. You know, she's always out on, campaigns and whatnot, which is a wonderful thing. But but the Greens themselves, they just have such an image problem. I mean, the name itself doesn't help because it sort of ensures that they're always going to be seen as a one policy party, whatever the truth or otherwise of that. Now, I think they are to an extent, but I think they're trying to broaden their horizons. But unfortunately, as I said, big problem. Lots of principles, no way of putting them into practice. Natalie Bennett obviously lost her seat. Now she was standing up here down here in London, I suppose, if you happen to be up north, which the vast proportion of you are. She didn't get her seat. She was standing in Holborn St Pancras, which is a constituency I spend an awful lot of time in as a trainee lawyer. A lot of stuff going on in Holborn. Not massively surprising that she lost it. She hasn't stood down, though, I note, which is an interesting choice, I think. Though the Green Party leaders are only elected to 2-year terms, as opposed to all the others who are generally elected to until the party gets sick of you. But Natalie Bennett's big problem was that she didn't seem to know the policies. You know, she was doing all these interviews, and she did do some good interviews, but they were dominated on the press by these ones where she sort of went catastrophically wrong and didn't seem to know what she was saying. And again, that's another thing people don't want to see. They want to know people who got their policies straight. And I can't help but think myself that the sooner Carolyn Lucas is back as leader of the Greens, the better it'll be for the party. But I don't have a massive sort of personal interest in that because the Greens they're never going to be super. They've been very popular with students this time, but a lot of people prevented voting for them either because there wasn't candidate standing or because they felt they had to vote tactically, which is, I don't want to say it's a cardinal sin, it's an inevitability, that's what happens in democracy, but it's an unfortunate truth, shall we say. So the Greens didn't do so well. They only got their one seat, which is Carolyn Lucas's in Brighton. But they did increase their vote share, which was nice for them, even if it didn't really lend them anything. But yeah, so I feel a bit sorry for the Greens, but then also a lot of the things that went wrong for them, they brought upon themselves, so wasn't really surprising. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all I can say about the Greens, because there's not really much to say about the Greens. Right, Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales. Plaid Cymru took the opposite approach to the Scottish National Party. Now, they took the opposite approach for several reasons. They took the opposite approach because they were never going to be able to win as many seats as the SNP, purely because there aren't that many seats in Wales. The Welsh aren't so keen on the old nationalism lark. And I say that as someone who has previously been accosted, shall we say, to put it politely, by a Welsh nationalist. Long story. If you want to know, I'll do a Q&A at some point and explain the story to you. But yeah, they went into it with the attitude that they were just in it for Wales. If you watch the leaders' debate, Leanne Wood, who is a woman who I really don't like Leanne Wood. She's very personable, she's very friendly, she seems very approachable, but I purely don't like her on the basis that she's a bit rude. She was quite famously in Wales, I don't know how big the story made it over here, she was thrown out of the Welsh Assembly by the Speaker, who was at the time Lord Ellis Thomas. Because she called the Queen Mrs. Windsor, and I'm a bit of a monarchist, and I don't really like people. I'm not one of those ardent monarchists who's all bowy and scrapey, but I think there are certain standards of behaviour, shall we say, that should be upheld, and she crossed the line there several times. So I think, personally, not a massive fan of it. But so Plaid Cymru, there's really not much to say because Plaid Cymru they were in it for Wales. They made that very obvious, the whole point. There was hardly any point in her being at those leadership debates because the things she was saying were affecting hardly any people. I'm all for the major leaders of the parties being represented, but as she was speaking, I was just thinking, well, you're sort of saying Wales every 10 seconds, and I get why, because that's your voting area. But look at the proportion of seats. There's really not all that much point in you being here. Possibly the wrong attitude to take, might draw some cross comments on Twitter or whatever from it. Yeah, okay. I'm very sorry. I wish I could say otherwise, because, I lived in Wales for 3 years. Wales is a beautiful, wonderful place. It has beautiful, wonderful people in it. But yeah, the very little point in her being there, I think. They got their few seats. They got 4 seats. No, 3 seats. Sorry, I'm just checking this. Which is the ones they already held. So they didn't actually gain or lose anything. Yeah, so a fair showing by Plaid Cymru, but that was all they were ever going to do. Okay. I said I'm not going to talk about the Northern Irish parties much. It will literally be this 30-second bit, because I genuinely know nothing of Northern Irish politics, because it's the sort of region that gets forgotten, because it's a region that these days, I don't know whether we have a sort of Northern Ireland blindness, because it goes, oh sorry, I went Northern Irish a bit, that was weird. Sorry, I said Northern Ireland, and I went all of a sudden Derry or somewhere. That's not Northern Ireland, but you get the point. So yeah, I think in certainly the majority of people, because we don't really have, this is going to sound awful, and it's probably kind of ironic, but we don't really have much problem these days from the Northern Irish. The Scots always kick up fuss because they're Scots and they kind of feel a bit hard done by, and probably fairly so in some respects. The Welsh are, they're close, and they're like our little brothers, aren't they? Really. But Northern Ireland, I think, gets ignored a bit because you never really hear anything from it. I think it's dropped off the radar massively, and not necessarily to its benefit. Obviously, there was a few Sinn Féin MPs elected. No apparent change in their policy not to actually send their MPs to Westminster. Not surprising, given the party policy, given the history. But yeah, not really much I can say without sort of being massively ignorant about it, so I'm not going to try. I did note, I think it was in Northern Ireland, that it was the only independent MP. Lady, I can't remember her name, she's the wife of a knight, and I know you shouldn't define someone by who their husband is, that's awfully misogynist of me. It's a double-barreled surname, but I can't remember. I will look it up and make sure I reference that in another video at some point. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about Northern Ireland, because I don't know what I can say really that's going to be fair to all involved. If somebody wants to comment on this and explain this political situation in Northern Ireland to me, please do, because I'm always looking for new knowledge, and that would be another thing I can just add to my stock of brain space, as it were. Right. Now we're getting to the interesting ones. We're getting to the big ones here. And I'm going to start with UKIP. Because, excuse me, because UKIP. That's all I can say. I don't like UKIP. I think they're a reactionary bunch of prats, headed by the arch prat, Nigel Farage, or formerly headed, I should say, though I suspect he will return. They actually lost a seat, of course. They lost Mark Reckless's seat. Douglas Carswell carried on. But they lost Mark Reckless's seat. Nigel Farage didn't win his. I note there's been some rather amusing, amusing musings, I suppose, on the Twitter sphere and amongst a few other places where I get my information from, that some of the UKIP members in Thanet South are a little put out by this and have started speculating that the vote might have been rigged. The vote was, I can almost say with almost certain categoric certainty, was not rigged. It's just that people didn't trust UKIP. Now, that being said, UKIP, of course, increased their vote share massively. I always said, and I still maintain it, that people were a lot more worried by UKIP than they needed to be. There was no way in heaven that UKIP were ever going to get more than absolute maximum, probably 5 seats. I said 8 to some people, but there was no way they were going to get more than that. As it happened, of course, they got a lot less. They got 1. But people were terrified of this sort of rise of UKIP, as it was always put in the papers. And I know some of the papers endorsed them. I think the Daily Mail endorsed them. Hardly surprised, because it's the Daily Mail, which is basically toilet paper with ink spilt on it. So, yeah, people always were more worried about the rise of UKIP now. But they did draw a massive share of the vote, which is slightly worrying because it does mean if ever the voting system did change, again, talk about that later, we might have a problem. Because they'd now have 86 seats, I think it was, on these results. Now, the other thing was that they drew a lot of, and the thing that I was surprised by, the sort of first surprise I had of the evening, I have to say, was how much of a vote they managed to draw from the northeast. The northeast, of course, being a very Labour area. And people worried they were taking votes from the Tories. They were supposed to be splitting the Tory vote, whereas actually we were kind of splitting both votes. And that was a bit concerning to me because I think there's a point when disillusionment with current party politics becomes a bit dangerous, and I think we might have reached it with UKIP because they were drawing a hell of a lot of left-wingers as well as a hell of a lot of right-wingers, which was a bit of a problem, I think, and possibly could come back to bite people on the arse. But the UKIP, I don't know what I can say about UKIP. They're so easy to satirise. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, and it's a really big fish and a really small barrel. It's not. They're just idiots, frankly. I've got friends who support them. If any of those are watching, sorry for calling you idiots, but they work on the policy and politics of fear. They're going on about Britain's full up. Britain's not full up. They talk about immigrants coming over here stealing our jobs. No, immigrants coming over here and either doing the jobs that regular white, working class Britons don't want, or they're doing the jobs that they are not qualified for, and don't have any inclination to get qualified for. I'd prefer to be treated by a Polish doctor who knows what they're doing than to pop round the back of the bins in, I don't know, no, I'm not going to say an area, in some random estate, in Nottingham, to let, Bob take out my kidney. I'm not going to do that. I want to go to a proper doctor who's qualified. So, the whole immigration thing immigration is a whole hot potato topic. I might tackle it again in another video. I won't tackle it in this one because it gets stupidly emotive and stupidly people just start abusing each other. So, I don't know. But UKIP lost, and I'm quite pleased about that. That's what I'm going to say. Really, I'm quite pleased about that. I'll come on to Nigel Farage's resignation in a bit. Right. Now we come to the elephant in the room. Not so much an elephant as a woolly mammoth with alopecia. The Lib Dems. The Lib Dems. Part of our government for the last 5 years. That the Lib Dems were going to lose massively in this election, were going to do really badly, was not a surprise. It shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. They'd lost a lot of support over the tuition fees. They lost a lot of support over the coalition as a whole. I think in some ways that was unfair because I think people just forgot what the nature of a coalition is, and it's not that there's a 50-50 split between two parties. It's that one party is the dominant party and the other is a supporting party. That's what a coalition is. That shouldn't have been a surprise to everyone, but I think it ended up being a surprise to a lot of people who were hoping that the Lib Dems would be forceful and strong and get through most of their policies. What did shocked me, and I wasn't surprised as such because I knew it was going to happen, was exactly how badly they did. When you looked at their vote shares in these constituencies, some of which they'd held for 20 years, just look at the numbers were just truly shocking. Truly abysmally shocking. And, they've lost, 46 seats or whatever it was. Hang on, let me just double check my figures here. Oh, 49 seats. I'm overestimating. They've kept 8 of them. That's potentially party destroying. I don't think it is in this case. I'll talk about that in a second. But that's a devastating result. That's a shocking result. It was inevitable, but it was shocking. Yeah, I said that I don't think it's going to be the ending of the party. I don't think it is. The Lib Dems, the advantage the Lib Dems have is that they are very good locally. Councils they're good on. Their candidates, I mean, their MPs and their candidates are really popular, personally. But the party itself, slightly less so. The party itself is kind of a bit of a mess. The party itself is a bit of a mess for many reasons. Part of the reason I've always ascribed it to, and I've no doubt there will be politics professors who massively disagree with me on this one, is the fact that I think there's still a problem there in that they're still kind of two separate parties. They're still the Social Democrats and the Liberals, and I think there's a problem there that they haven't quite brought themselves together just perfectly yet. They're still trying to work out the balance, and it's a sad thing. There's a lot of their ideas are very nice, and they do what the Greens do not, and they price them properly. Largely probably, and they have a degree of sort of realism about them. So I don't think it'll be the end. I think what they're going to have to do for this Parliament, certainly maybe a couple more as well, is go to being a largely local-based organisation. They need to sit down and have a rethink, because they need to fall back to their strengths, ultimately, and their strengths are in local politics at the moment, not in national politics as this has been developed. I do think their loss was massively unfair. I think it was predilected on a lot of things, but it was predilected on the public being vaguely unaware about the nature of a coalition. It's the first time we've had one since 26 or whenever it was, so it's an unusual thing. But nevertheless, they lost, is the sad and unfortunate truth. They lost, and they lost badly. We'll talk about them again in the leader section, of course, because they lost theirs. So yeah, I'm not going to say too much more, because I think it would be disingenuous to do so. There's not really much I can add to that. So yeah, it was a very unfortunate state of affairs for the Lib Dems. Inevitably, I think they've paid the price for government. I think it was a classic example, and probably the best recent example of people putting nation before party, as it should be. But the knock-on effect of that has been that the party is now in dire straits, and I'm not talking about Mark Knopfler and his lot. They are in trouble, and it's going to take them years to recover, because they're just going to really struggle, because they've got to pick themselves up from practically nothing, which is going to be very painful. It's going to be a very long process for them. So yeah, sorry Lib Dems. It was a you did the right thing, but it's had such a knock on. No, it was worth it because it protected the country when we needed it, but yeah, I'm sorry, I really am. I really do feel bad for Lib Dems. So if you're a Lib Dem out there, really am sorry. Right, the Labour Party. We come on to the Labour Party. The Labour Party, they suffered because of the SNP. I've already talked about the SNP. They ran a better campaign than everyone expected. Let's be honest about this. They were always expected to run a bit of a wet campaign because of who their leader was. I'm still of the belief that David Miliband would have made a better leader, but I think Ed Miliband did did a credible job. He did a very credible job with difficult circumstances. Um, he did make some glaring errors. He made the headstone error, which became, or the Edstone, as Twitter invariably ended up calling it. That was a true the thick of it idea, wasn't it? True, just a catastrophically sort of chintzy and really, I don't think there was a person who looked at that other than some advertising jock in the party and looked at that and thought, oh, that's a great idea. Oh, why did no one else think of that? Why did no one else think of spending 30,000 on a big lump of rock and, cutting it and then Ed signing it? So, because let's face it, that was a poor decision because, who'd want to claim credit for that? Let's be honest. And the worst thing is they don't even know where it's gone now. I reckon it's been used as a kitchen worktop. I wouldn't even be surprised if David Cameron hasn't had it shipped into Downing Street to use as his kitchen worktop, just as a sort of final thumb bite, as Shakespeare would have done to Labour. But yeah, they did a good job in the circumstances. They were fighting, they were fighting this battle for a new way, and I think people just didn't trust their new way. And the problem is ultimately that the Conservative plan is working. It's very, very painful for a lot of people, but it is sort of working. It's working to the extent that it's good enough for the economy, not for people. It is bad for people. Ultimately, I think a lot of people came to the conclusion that it was better that a few people should suffer for a short period of time, but the economy was fixed fast, than all of us suffer a bit more for a longer period of time. I think that was the problem Labour had. They just didn't get that message across. They didn't manage to counter that feeling. Although it looked like, obviously, for most of the campaign, that they'd been damnably successful in doing so. This is why the polls were so close, because clearly there were people who thought, yeah, Labour plans are great. But it was just a catastrophically bad night for them. I think it was almost as bad as the Lib Dem night, but for different reasons. They lost some of their key players. Ed Balls went. That's the Shadow Chancellor. The Shadow Chancellor should not be losing his seat. Unless in this circumstance he was in Scotland. If he was in Scotland, it was inevitable. But he wasn't. He shouldn't be losing his seat. That's not something that should be happening to the Shadow Chancellor. This is a man who, in theory, could be running the financial district of the country. You don't want to have them losing their seat. They lost their campaign manager, Douglas Alexander. Another thing that shouldn't really be happening. If the campaign manager can't campaign enough to keep his seat, you've got a problem. So yeah, a bit of an awful night for them. Certainly shocked faces all the way around at Labour HQ, because it was the SNP that did it. Let's not make any bones about it. The SNP completely wiped out their vote in Scotland. Bang, there goes nearly 60 seats. It would have been nigh and impossible for them to have done anything with what they had. So I think a good showing for Labour, as good as can be expected. They struggled, but they struggled sort of because of their own sort of hubris, and sort of because they didn't push their message well enough. And obviously Labour is now going to have a rethink. I'm not going to talk about it here, I'll talk about it at the end. They're going to have to go back and have a rethink for the next few years. So yeah, a bit of a struggle for Labour. So we come to the winners. I thought I'd leave the winners to last. The Conservative Party. I've often lived in Conservative constituencies. Back home I was, down here I am now as well. Well, I was before as well. Our MP before the election was Sir Malcolm Rifkind, of course, caught out in that little sting organised by the Express or the Mirror or whoever it was. The Conservative Party just has an image problem, doesn't it? It's still got the nasty big corporations running it. Eton boys problem. But what people tend to overlook, of course, is that these days pretty much all the parties are run by Eton big boys. Labour Party, same thing. Private school, Oxbridge, they're not. There's no party that's really different on that one. Conservative campaign. It was a very negative campaign. I know a lot of people didn't like it because of that. A lot of people I know who usually vote Conservative had criticised it because of that. And it definitely could be criticised because it was a very negative campaign. But evidently they got their message over better. They have sort of a disadvantage because they're in government, but they also have a sort of advantage because they have shown what they can do in government, even when, as they would no doubt put it, held back by another party. They've got a lot of plans for this government that I don't like. They want to get rid of the Human Rights Act. Now, I'm a bit of a heretic. If you want good government, you can't have human rights. That's the way it works. If you want good and efficient government, you can't have human rights. But human rights are necessary. I will support the Human Rights Act to my dying day. I think, or short forms of human rights. I know they've talked about replacing it with the Bill of Rights, the British Bill of Rights. Personally, I'd prefer to stick with the Human Rights Act because it's a bit more international. A lot of the things that they complain about and the detractors of it complain about aren't actually really arguments against it because they're just based on misconceptions peddled in the popular press. They also have upcoming, of course, we're going to get this referendum on the EU. That worries me a lot because if you look at the opinion polls, people who want to leave the EU, there's a heck of a lot of them. And leaving the EU is a very bad idea. Leaving the EU is a very bad idea because the amount of trade we get from them, as much as anything, the amount of money we get from the EU is astonishing. And it would take us years to get that much from anyone else. Absolutely years. Because it would basically mean re-kickstarting our entire external economy. We'd lose 28 trading partners that we can now trade with certainty and have to replace them. And it would inevitably have to have us heading towards Brazil and India and China, Mexico maybe, which is no bad thing, but there's no reason we can't be doing that in the same time as we are interacting with the EU. So yeah, I'm worried because it is kind of a problem. But Tony Blair drew a lot of criticism when he said that no, it wasn't Tony Blair. Somebody said that it looked like Labour didn't trust the British people on the EU. They're right to do so. If you look at the numbers, they are entirely right to do so because there are so many people who will vote to leave that it might well be that we leave, and that would be a very bad thing. The EU is a bureaucratic monstrosity. There's no avoiding that. It's a top-heavy, awful thing. But most of the sort of counter arguments are based on misconceptions. The EU is fundamentally trying to do the right thing. It is doing it in the wrong way. But yeah, I'm not going to make this an argument about the EU video because I can do that separately and I don't have time, and this is an election video. But yeah, so the Conservatives won. They won with a majority. It's not a very big majority, which means they are probably going to struggle because they do have rebellious backbenchers and the whips are only so strong. Both in the physical and the professional sense. So they are going to have problems, but they can probably hold it together, I think. I hope they can because we don't need another election anytime soon, really. It's a bit of an expensive thing to have to keep happening. But yeah, there was the surprise of them actually winning, because even that opinion poll didn't suggest they'd actually win, the exit poll. So big surprise there. It's given us security for a bit. Hopefully, I hope they repeal the Fixed Term Parliament Act. I'm not a fan of that. I think that was a stupid idea, and I think a lot of people who voted for it are actually now reconsidering their position. But hopefully they'll get rid of that. And and we can have a bit of stable government just for a while. I noticed there's been protests today. I wasn't sure whether to put this in a separate video. There's been a lot of protests today regarding them being back in. Personally, I think it's a bit silly. They were democratically elected. Whether the whether the democracy is perfect, again, we'll talk about the voting systems in a minute, is kind of irrelevant. They were democratically elected. They got the largest share of the vote. They got the most seats. It's their right to form a government. Most people wanted them. You can't just throw your toys out of the pram because it's wrong, because you think it's wrong, because you didn't get your party in, which I think it smacks of when you just go out and protest because another government got in. It's a sad truth, you know. The Conservatives are bad, but all parties are bad. No one's ever going to fit entirely with your views, but you have to respect democracy. That's the fundamental principle on which Western society is based these days, because of this damnable nuisance of an idea that we have that democracy should be above everything else. So that's all the party's done. So I'm now going to talk about. I'll talk about the. I'll do the resignation bloodbath next, and then give a few comments on potential futures for the party. I won't go into it much because it's been done so many times by so many other people. But this might be a shorter way if you don't want to read through reams of paperwork and press articles. And then I'll do a quick chat about first past the post and proportional voting and whatnot. Yeah. Okay. So yes, we had this massive bloodbath over the course of Friday. I think who went first? I think it was either Clegg or Farage went first. Nick Clegg, I think, went first. He had to fall on his sword. While he was party leader, they were never going to get over the coalition. That was an inevitability. They could never have got over that. He was poison to the party while he was still there. He kept his seat, obviously, although I'm not sure. I don't know. Part of me thinks he might resign his seat as well, because I think it would be possibly a bit awkward for him when there are plenty of cushy jobs waiting as a lecturer or in the EU or wherever. There's plenty of options for him, and I think being an MP might be a bit of an awkward one. So I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not going to pin my sort of reputation on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he doesn't say, okay, someone else can take my seat. So the future of the Lib Dems, Tim Farron, basically. He's the only real choice you've got. Now Vince Cable's gone. I mean, obviously the Lib Dems lost a lot of big hitters as well. They lost Danny Alexander, not Douglas Alexander, he was the Labour one. They lost Vince Cable. Vince Cable was the only other candidate really they had for the leadership, but Vince Cable was, and I say this with the best will in the world, an old man. He is a good politician, but he is also an old man. So they would have struggled to convince people, I think, on that one. So, I mean, obviously the Lib Dem rules say they have to be selected from their parliamentary party, so that gives them 8 members to choose from, some of whom have already said they won't stand. So basically, I mean, Tim Farron hasn't said he's going to stand, but he is realistically the only choice the party can make. So yeah, so then after Clegg, we had Farage fall on his sword in what I think he thought was a spectacularly heroic fashion, having made the promise before that if he didn't win the seat, he would. He didn't actually say that he wouldn't stand for it again. In fact, he said he would take a holiday over the summer and think about whether to stand again. I think he might well do so because, if only because of one thing, which is that I think in the eyes of the public, the UKIP is now indelibly associated with Nigel Farage. They are essentially a one-person party. You can't really name many others of theirs. Douglas Carswell's already said he's not going to stand. He wants to focus on being an MP. Of course, that's no guarantee that he won't stand. There were a couple of other names being bandied around. I know Paul Nuttall, who's their deputy leader, he was talked about. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get the Nigel Farage show Mark III come September or whenever it is they're having their election. So I wouldn't clock Nigel Farage out just yet. I think I'd keep him on your conscience. Depends how drunk he gets over the summer, of course. He's always seen with a pint of alcohol in his hands. Just think how much he drinks when he's on holiday, when he's not working. So yeah, I wouldn't count him out just yet. And of course, last we had Ed. The Millie fandom was panicked. They were in tears because Ed went, and he had to. He lost an election. He lost it badly. But it does leave Labour with a problem because who is their next leader? There's some speculation that David Miliband might come back and take it. I doubt it, personally. He's got himself a nice cushy job as CEO of International Rescue, not the Thunderbirds one, but the foundation. He could do, but he'd probably have to try and get a parliamentary seat, and that might be a bit tricky. Andy Burnham has been bandied around a lot. Okay, I think he would be a little more than a placeholder. Yvette Cooper as well now. Ed Balzer, who's obviously her husband, has gone. She's got essentially a free run at the party leadership, with him as her trophy husband. Although quite how much of a trophy Ed Balzer is, I don't know. I'm not going to make comment on that one, I think, for safety's sake. The only other party is Chuka Umunna, who is... He's definitely a future Labour leader. I'm not entirely convinced he's the next one. I think he's possibly still seen as a bit too young. But I think I don't know. I think whether they have Burnham or Cooper as a sort of stopgap until Chuka Umunna is ready to take over, I don't know. No doubt they'll try and make a go of it, but he's the one the party want, and he's the one that eventually the party will get. And a good thing that will be, because he is a good politician. You know, he's a whatever you say about him, he's a good politician. So that was the post-election bloodbath, the scalping of three party leaders. I don't know whether it was actually the most resignations post-election ever, but it certainly must be in the running. I mean, David Cameron must be so pleased with himself, so insufferably smug, even more than usual. So it's going to be interesting. The next couple of months for the parties that aren't in government are going to be fascinating. Keep an eye on them, because it's going to be just as fascinating as the election, seeing who they go with. Right. The big thing that's come out of this, the other big thing, one of many big things, most of which I've already discussed, is this first past the post versus proportional representation. People have been pointing out that it's very unfair that the Scottish National Party got 5% of the vote and got 58 seats, whereas UKIP got the same or whatever and got 1, and the Greens did the same. It is unfair. We'll start with that disclaimer. It is unfair. It's democracy, but it is unfair. Proportional representation, I think. I mean, obviously we had the referendum on alternative voting last time. Last term, rather, in 2011 or wherever it was. I can't remember when it was. I know it was when I was doing my undergrad in Wales, so I remember going to vote for it. But I think it's going to come onto the table again. The current system of representation is in some ways a relic of the past. It's based on the old system whereby you voted for somebody who could speak for your voices locally. These days, I don't know whether it's becoming irrelevant, because there are some MPs who do a damn good job of speaking for locals. There are some MPs who do a damn good job of that. Lib Dems had a lot of them. Still have a few, but not as many as they had. I think that there's certainly arguments for them both, and I don't want to at this point pin my colours to a mast. There are problems with both. A lot of people at the moment, and I know it's the post-election joy sort of ride or hate ride, depending on which side of the debate you fall on, seem to be thinking that proportional representation, will be the be-all and end-all and will make everything wonderful. It won't. There's a lot of problems with proportional representation. Would it be fairer? Yes. Would it be more representative of the vote share? Yes, it would. But it does mean you remove those party politicians who are actually fighting for their constituents. In theory, it works very well, but in practice, it doesn't really change all that much, because ultimately the system is predicated on MPs voting as their party tells them. You get the odd one who doesn't, and they get in trouble. That is the system. The system is you vote how the party tells you. If you don't, you're in trouble. So on the one hand, it would help things in some respects, but on the other hand, it's not fundamentally going to change much. What it would ensure is that we would have a lot more coalition governments. I noted I saw a few sort of posts on Twitter and Facebook criticizing, saying first past the post is awful because it promises you stable government, and then it doesn't give you one. Basing this on the coalition. Now, their big accusation was that this was a lie. First past the post and stable government was a big myth. It's not the myth. First past the post as a rule for the past, well, we've had democracy of a form in this country for 800, 900 years. For a while we've been using first past the post. Broadly, it's given us stable governments. It's not given us many coalitions, it's given us a few. Mostly national governments in wartime. But in this one, broadly speaking, it's worked. So I think to say that it's a lie that it gives you stable government is not true at all, because it does as a rule. It gives you the odd one. It's only when people become apathetic, as they have recently, that it becomes a bit more problematic. So I think alternative voting is going to be a big issue. I would caution people not to think of it as the be-all and end-all, because I think there's a risk, and I think a lot of people have done. If there is a debate on it, I will talk about it in future again. I will talk about another video, and I will go through the pros and cons. I don't know where I stand on it, to be quite honest. It appeals to me in a lot of respects, but in other respects, I don't see it would make enough of a difference to actually be worth doing, worth the upheaval. So yeah, so that's where I stand on the whole debate for now. If it comes to a point where I have to make a decision, then I will make a decision. But at the moment, I'm content just to ruminate on it in my head and then ponder it for a bit more. Okay, so that was my post-election musing. It goes on for almost an hour. If you didn't watch all of it, I can completely understand that, because I'm sure most of it was very boring. I'm much better at commentating these events live on Twitter, where I can be funny on the instincts, as opposed to when I've had a chance to think about them like now, where it's sort of difficult to be instinctually funny. I scattered a few gags in there, not that they were very good, but I hope they kept you entertained. So, I don't know what the next big event I will cover will be. I might try and do the state opening of Parliament, actually, on the excuse me, I got the hiccups. 27th of May, I might try and do that. If I do, I'll let you know. Keep an eye on the Twitter feed. If you don't follow me on Twitter, please go and do so. I'll put a link in the description. That's the one. Sorry, forgot the word for a second there. I had a lot of words today, so I think that's fair. I'll put a link in the description. I'll put a link to the other YouTube channels I run as well. I don't run many, but I'll put a link there in case you want to go and see any of my other stuff. More stuff is coming on all of them. Obviously, I've got A Gentleman Plays, so I'll put more stuff on there. I've had my bar exams and stuff, so it's been a bit hectic of late. But I will put more stuff on there. It is coming, don't worry. There is more stuff going. I have good plans for that. Now I've got a bit more free time. Also, travels and tribulations that I did when I was traveling the States. I will be doing a little more traveling later this year, so I'll try and put some more stuff there. Again, it'll be the same thing, pretty much a slideshow with me blethering on about nonsense over the top of it. But a lot of people seem to like that when I was in the States. I know I didn't finish the States. I'm terribly sorry. At some point I might go back, but most of it will be fiction by this point because I can't remember it. I can't remember it well enough to do a humorous commentary on it, and I can't find my notes. So, but I will do more stuff. I'll be doing more travelling, so I'll do commentary on that. For now, however, this gentleman is I'm going to get food actually, because it's near 10 o'clock and I haven't eaten yet. So, for now, this gentleman, goodbye.